This week's talk is entitled Relationship Lies and continues Reverend Wendy's series inspired by the book The Lies We Believe by Dr. Chris Thurman. Reverend Wendy talks about how shifting our beliefs about relationships can make our relationships stronger and our lives better.
So last week we began a 4-part series on the lies we believe. And last week we talked about personal lies we tell ourselves. Today we're going to talk about relationship lies. Relationship lies. I wish in a way that I was giving this talk in a classroom setting, because if I were, I would be asking you to take out a piece of paper and to write down what you think are common lies that people tell themselves about relationships. So you might want to consider doing that just on your own for the heck of it. Think about, well, what do you think are some of the untruths that people tell themselves about relationships? It'd be fun to see how much crossover there is. And so in this series, the focus is really about telling ourselves the truth. About telling ourselves the truth. You know, most of the time when we think about being honest, I think our first thought is being honest with other people. And perhaps that's because we're taught very early as children to be honest, to tell the truth, and that there are consequences if we're not honest. But as we get older, I think it's important for us to appreciate that in addition to telling the truth to others, it's important for us to tell the truth to ourselves. And sometimes the best way to do something like that is to back into it by asking ourselves, well, where are the places and what are the times and the ways that I'm not being honest with myself, that I'm not telling myself the truth? So I want to set the context for us this morning. So again, it's about telling ourselves the truth by looking at lies that we tell ourselves about relationships. And the context for this message is because of the importance of our relationships. We are social beings. Life works better when we know how to be together with one another. Whether we are talking about being together with our family and our significant other, or whether we are talking about being together in a group or in a community, it's a whole lot nicer when people know how to do that in harmony and understand how to do that in harmony. Do you think that if we learned how to be together better, that maybe our world itself might be a little bit better if we learn how to do that as nations, as countries? Absolutely. So relationships are very important to us. Relationships can absolutely bring out the very best in us. Have you noticed that? They can bring out the very best in us. Have you also noticed that they can bring out the very worst in us? I want you to think about the person that you love the most, and I want you to think and kind of feel, do they bring out the best in you? When you're with them, are you inspired to be your best self? Okay? And I bet the answer is yeah. Person that loves you the most, that you love the most, when you're with them, it's easy, you want to be your best self. Now I want you to think about the person that is the coarsest sandpaper to your soul. And it may be one of your exes. Who knows? Think about the person that just gets under your skin, that pushes your buttons. Everybody got at least one of those people? If not, if you've got an extra one, give your neighbor one. And I bet that relationship, if it helps you to pull out the best, it's because you're applying some of the ideas that I want to talk to you about this morning. But I bet that if you're honest, that relationship tends to pull out the worst in you. When I was in ministerial school, one of the jobs that I had was working in Silent Unity's 24-hour prayer ministry and in the phone room. And what I discovered rather quickly after being there and receiving phone calls from all different kinds of people from all over the country and sometimes from around the world is that by and large, the very most common phone call that we would get would be a phone call requesting support for prayer around a relationship issue. Now, there were other topics for sure. Probably the second most common was the topic of health. But more than any other relationship, people would call in for prayer support on improving a relationship. More than any other area in our lives, our relationships provide us the opportunity to grow. That is so important for us to really recognize. And when we do, when we recognize that more than any other area of our life, our relationships provide us the opportunity to grow, when we really understand that, we will show up very differently in our relationships than if we don't understand the truth of that. How many of you are familiar with, or perhaps are studying, the body of work called A Course in Miracles? That's a good percentage of you. A Course in Miracles was channeled or was received about in the early 1970s. I know I came into that work my first year of ministerial school. I still pick it up from time to time and begin the whole workbook series. It's a 365-day workbook and text. And I still, every once in a while, will pick it up and start all over again in studying and applying the teachings of A Course in Miracles. And the very course itself is a result of human conflict, of people that were very conflicted and were having a very difficult time working together. It was in a work environment. The material was channeled or received, if you will, by Helen Schuckman, and her process was supported by William Thetford. It's important to note that neither one of these individuals considered themselves to be spiritual, and both of them were highly educated. They were both professors of medical psychology at Columbia University. And what had happened is they were not getting along together at all. And the whole department was affected by this very aggressive, negative kind of relationship. And the department head came to them and basically said, I've had enough of this. Something has got to change. Got to get rid of this anger and this aggression. And that was kind of the impetus for Helen's opening to this idea and support of there's got to be a better way. Have you noticed that when things really start to fall apart in any area of your life, that there's a part of you that recognizes, wait a minute, there's got to be another way here. There's something I'm not seeing. There's something I'm not understanding. There's a change I've got to make because what exists now is not what I want to continue to experience in my life. Anyway, that's what happened to them in this particular setting. And Helen started to have symbolic dreams and started to kind of see things and hear things. That's something she eventually called the voice, and started to write down what it was that she was hearing. And in running throughout the entire Course in Miracles is the idea of the internal presence and power that we have in how we interact with each other. And that a tiny shift in perception, a tiny shift in understanding the dynamics of us working together can fundamentally change the quality of our life experience. All because of relationship difficulty. I'm trying to really emphasize for us that as we come together on a Sunday morning, I think, because we want to grow spiritually. And we want our lives to work even better than they do right now. And so we come together because we have that desire. And yet sometimes I think we can lose sight of the richest place in which we grow and learn is the one that we're in all of the time, and it's our relationships. It's our relationships. So I'm going to share with you 5 lies that are common relationship lies. And though they certainly apply very, very well to any sort of coupling. So a marriage, living together with someone, or close personal relationships. They're geared, these 5 lies and overcoming them are geared primarily to that. So if you are not now in a marriage or a committed partnership or relationship, take really good notes, because I promise you this will be helpful for when you are. I also promise you that you will probably be able to look at in hindsight and see more clearly why your previous relationship didn't work so well, okay? And also know that there is value in each of these ideas in any relationship, okay? So first I want to share with you a fundamental problem most of us have in relationship, and it has to do with how we dig into this idea of we've got to be right. I love this poem that I found many years ago from vagabond poet Don Blanding. Marriage, my dear, is a triangle. Your angle, our angle, my angle. And the usual cause when we do wrangle is a question of I, us, or you angle. I object when you say that the sure angle of our angle ought to be your angle, when I know that a right angle triangle must be based on a right angle, my angle. And then the fight began. Can you relate to that at all? Can you relate to that at all? So some of you know this. I'm married now. John and I have been married for about 29 years, I think. I've been divorced, and I have married, divorced, and remarried the same man. First person in either of our families to have been married, or not to have been married, to have been divorced. And one of the things that I can absolutely say to you is I always learn more about myself when I'm trying to understand John. I always learn more about myself when I'm trying to understand my husband. I want you to think about the most challenging person in your life, whether it's your partner, a business partner, a coworker, your mother-in-law, your father-in-law. And I want you to hold in your mind this thought. I can learn more about myself to the degree that I'm willing to understand so and so. I can learn more about me to the degree that I'm willing to understand so and so. Our relationships are not just about doing fun things together. Our relationships are not just about companionship. Our primary relationships have the absolute power and potential to awaken us spiritually more than anything else. More than anything else. Your primary relationship has the opportunity to awaken you spiritually. Lie number 1, if it takes hard work, we must not be right for each other. That's a lie. It's a very common myth. It's a very common story that people tend to tell themselves. You know, you fall in love with someone and everything seems to be wonderful and beautiful and happy and right in the beginning, and then not so much so. Stuff happens, challenges happen. We have to work at it a little bit, and there is a real tendency, and I think our divorce statistics bear this out very much now, that we've maybe swung the pendulum way too far to the other side as we assume, well, if it takes hard work, then we must not be right for each other, and we leave, and we leave. I look at my parents who have been married for 50 plus years, and though the kind of dynamic they have and the kind of relationship they have is not what I want in my primary relationship, what I can absolutely say that they gave me, among many things, was an eyewitness experience of two people working through really difficult things in their life and working through them in such a way that they were able to come out the other end of those really, I'm talking about really serious challenges, to come out the other end still very much in love with each other and still very much wanting to journey through their life together. and having changed as a result, each of them individually having changed as a result of that. Am I saying that we should never break up? I'm not saying that at all. You ought to know me by now to know well enough that I would never go that black and white on anything like that. But what I am saying is that within our close relationships, especially when they seem to be challenging, if we begin to recognize within that challenge is the very energy to awaken us to a new understanding of ourselves and a new expression of ourselves, we will grow in a phenomenal way, and the relationship itself will be different because of that. Because of that. Is this making sense? Because you're awfully quiet. You're awfully quiet. It's like we say in metaphysics that we draw to us by right of consciousness the experiences we find ourselves in. We draw to us by right of consciousness our primary relationships. And sometimes those relationships require us to really fundamentally shift and grow and change, to awaken to understanding ourselves better. I know of couples, here's a hypothetical couple, but not so hypothetical. She's strong. She's independent. She's assertive. She is partnered with a man who is more gentle, more quiet, more passive. She wants him to be stronger and more assertive. And so she pushes for that. And the more she pushes for that, the more he backs away and wants her to be what? To back down. And then he becomes even more quiet and more still, and the cycle goes on and on and on until one of them wakes up and says, wait a minute, maybe within this dynamic it's not about changing you to be different. Maybe about this dynamic, it's about me looking and discovering different capacities within me and different ways of being within me that I've never developed before. And when the focus comes back to the self, instead of trying to change the other, you know what starts to happen? The dynamics of the other begin to shift and change very naturally, almost automatically. Second lie, you can and should meet all my needs. So why are you laughing? You've heard that, right? Or maybe there's a little part of you inside that has felt that way. You can and should meet all my needs. That is so unrealistic. It is so unrealistic. Our primary relationship isn't meant to be everything. Primary doesn't mean only. Doesn't mean only. So what do you do if within that primary relationship some of your needs are not met? You don't bail. You broaden your life experience. And you look at, well, where else? What other friendships or hobbies or interests or activities can I engage myself in so that when I come back into this relationship, there's a richness of sharing. There's a richness of sharing. This lie surfaces in a lot of funny little ways, a lot of little disguises like, well, you should share all the same interests with that significant other person. You should spend all your time together with that significant other person. And that significant other person should share all of your friends and vice versa. That is a recipe for a lot of friction and unhappiness. A lot of unrealistic expectations. Are you still with me? Yes? Okay. All right. Number 3 lie is a little bit related to the number 2, that you should meet all my needs. No. Some really important ones, yes. But all of them? No. No, John and I couldn't be any more different on some levels than we really are. All you have to do is get into my car and get into his car and turn on the radio. One of us has NPR on. The other, I don't even know what kind of music my husband listens to. I've lost track of what it's called. But it's nothing like what I listen to if I have music. And you know, right down the line, if we were to look at books that we read, very, very different interests. I think it was Socrates or Plato who said that there are 3 kinds of categories of relationships: transactional, which is basically kind of an exchange, business relationships, relationships that are based more on interests and just enjoying one another's company, and certainly in a primary relationship, you want some of that, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. And then more the kind of relationship that I'm talking about, the relationships that inspire and challenge us to be our very best selves, to wake up spiritually, and to grow deeply. Third lie, if you love me, very close, you should be able to read my mind. If you love me, I shouldn't have to tell you what I want. I'm hearing more of the women laugh. I don't know if we're tending to identify with this more than men, perhaps, but it is a lie. It is a lie. I mean, it would be wonderful if the people that you're closest to could always read your mind and could absolutely know what it is that you most are needing and wanting and what you most enjoy. I mean, it would be wonderful, but it's highly unrealistic that they're going to be able to read your mind. There's a great book, if you are in relationship and you either want to understand and deepen your relationship more, or if you're in relationship and it's challenged right now, read the book, or reread it if you've read it before, the book called The 5 Love Languages. The 5 Love Languages is a great, quick, easy read with a very simple way of coming to understand that we each both express and receive love in different ways. And if you have people in a primary relationship whose love languages are different, it doesn't mean that they're wrong for each other, but it does mean that some of their communication might be a little bit challenging. And they may need to do some understanding and identifying what their love language is and what their partner's love language is. My love language falls more in the category of the romantic, of the person who loves candlelight dinners and soft music and long walks and even longer conversations, where I'm on the receiving end, actually, of listening, not talking. My husband's love language is support and service. He shows me that he loves me by jumping and doing anything that I need. Yesterday, I'm in my living room helping our daughter Jennifer on an assignment, and I'm not feeling too well, and I'm drinking a cup of tea, and I say to John, do you have any of that emergency stuff in the house? It feels like I'm getting a cold or something. I don't even know if that stuff works. I know you swear by it. Do we have any of it? He says, well, I think we're out, but I will go to the store right now and get you some. And I thought, no. If it's in the bathroom, go grab it for me. That would be really helpful and great, but you don't need to go to the store. But right there, what was he doing? He was speaking through his language of love, which is grounded in helpfulness and service. Before I understood that that's what it was, it would feel annoying. And all I could focus on is, how come we don't sit and talk for hours on end? And what I learned, and it took a little while and some heartache, what I learned is, as long as I knew what my language was, and I understood what his language was, and didn't make him wrong for his, and didn't make me wrong for mine, that all I would need to do is ask for what I most wanted in the moment. That's pretty simple, isn't it? Honey, could we just sit and have a long, leisurely dinner? Can we light some candles? Can we just sit and talk? Can we just... And it would be an absolute yes. Drop everything. But here's the clincher, whether we're talking about these 2 love languages or any other combination. When the other doesn't know, and when you realize that the other person cannot read your mind, you've got to be willing to be vulnerable enough to ask for what you need in that moment. And a lot of times, that's the challenge right there. Because we lay over the need that we have, the need for appreciation or the need for time together, we lay over that need, the lie that says, well, if you really loved me, you would already know, and I shouldn't have to ask. So we lay over that lie because we're afraid to ask for what it is we want and to show ourselves, to be vulnerable in that way. Will we always get what we ask for? No. Probably much more often in our intimate relationships, for sure, if we and not with an attitude. Ken Keyes wrote a great book, 3 Prescriptions for Happiness, and one of them is ask for what you want, but don't demand it. So it's being vulnerable enough to ask for what it is that you want and not expect the other to read your mind. I'm going to very quickly go over 4 and 5 because they are pretty quick. The fourth one is, it's a 50-50 proposition. If I do my 50% and you do your 50%, we should just be fine. Guess what? Not by a long shot. The minute that we have the energy of 50-50, what we are essentially doing is we are keeping score. And I promise you this, your close friendships and your significant relationship will not last. Those relationships are not transactional relationships. There will be times in those relationships where you are going to need to give way more than your partner. And there will also be times in those relationships where you're going to need to receive way more from your partner than you're giving. But if you approach it with this transactional 50-50 feeling or energy, it's going to fall apart. That 50-50 energy is a judgmental energy. If I do this, and therefore you should have done that. And we're keeping score back and forth. Our real relationships, the relationships that help us grow, the relationships that make life worth living, are the ones that can never be subjected to this transactional energy. And then the very last lie is that happy couples never argue. Happy couples never disagree. Now, I have had a few friends that have very solid relationships say to me that they really don't argue. And I do believe that there are some relationships in which arguing and disagreeing is very, 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 very seldom. But for most relationships that really are good relationships, there are times of argument and disagreement. And unless we had healthy models growing up of how people can argue respectfully and disagree and then still find a way through that argument and through that disagreement to the other side, unless we had some modeling for that, we might need to get some help. We might not know how to be with another in a disagreeing point of view. I've often said about this community and those times when we have stepped into areas that are a little bold, a little more involved, say, in social justice or social action. I've often said, if in a community such as this, where we are committed to our spiritual growth and unfoldment, and where we are committed to this idea that we see the oneness in each other, if we in a community such as this and in a teaching such as this cannot allow for very diverse ways of thinking and being and very different points of view, whether it's on race or any of the hot social topics, if we can't be in dialogue around that, those differences, and still be respectful, what hope is there for the normal of humanity, right? So in our relationships, it is a myth to think that we're not ever going to argue, that we're not ever going to disagree. It's how we do it. And there's so much helpful information that you, at your fingertips, at your keyboard, through the internet, that you can find. If you know inside yourself that you really have some work to do here, that you've got some work to do in learning how to argue or to disagree and not damage your relationships as a result of it. Personally, I wonder about the strength and the intimacy of a relationship where there is no room for anger or disagreement. And I'll leave you with that. Namaste. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. The Unity Center, transforming lives and healing our world. Check us out Sundays at 9 and 11. Subscribe to our podcasts and download our free app for instant access to a wealth of spiritual teachings, services, and events.